Well, good morning. We are live right now. We are so excited to be live with the Morning Mint right now. We're live on LinkedIn, we're live on Facebook, and we're live on Triplemint's YouTube channel. And we're so happy to be here today with an incredible panel of experts to talk about the New York City market in Q2. Molly Townsend, who is our Senior Managing Director of Sales at Triplemint and also a licensed associate real estate broker. Welcome, Molly.
Hi, Rosana. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got Aaron Seawood of Team Carte Blanche, also a licensed associate real estate broker. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, Rosana. Happy to be here.
Oh, we're always so happy to have you. Noel Borbon, or in Spanish, Noel Borbon, also of Team Carte Blanche, licensed salesperson. How you doing, Noel?
I'm good. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Always so happy to have you. And Carson Alexander of the Carson Alexander team, also a licensed real estate salesperson. So happy to have you, Carson. How are you?
I'm good. Let's roll.
That's right. Carson's in Texas. He was able to log in because he's working on his real estate investment property of a flip house that he's been working on that may or may not be done in about a week. So that is very exciting. And
it's going to be done in a week now because it just said it on this live broadcast.
That's right.
That's right. Your contractors are on the spot, and so are you, since you are one of your main contractors.
Yep.
Well, thank you all for being with us today. We wanted to talk about the Q2 market in New York City because this market is on fire and it may or may not be like anything we have ever seen before. So I want to start with you, Molly. Contracts were up 58% from Q1 to Q2 this year and 550% from last quarter, Q2 2020 to Q2 2021. First of all, give us a quick summary of your career in real estate. You've been in this game for a long time. And tell us, have you ever seen anything like this?
Sure. Thanks, Rosana. I have been in the business in residential real estate in New York City for 18 years. I would say I've definitely never seen anything like this. I was a licensed real estate agent in 2008, 2009, which was the financial crisis and a very challenging time. This is nothing like that. And the recovery is looking nothing like that as well. I'd love to start by talking about this insane number, 550% from Q2 2020 to Q2 2021. I mean, we've got to have a disclaimer. It should be that every time we see that stat in parentheses, it says lockdown, okay? That's the only way in which this number makes sense. So if you recall, we were in lockdown in New York City for the entirety of Q2, except for 1 week. All right, so real estate agents were not permitted to transact, were not permitted to show. So the whole industry was on hold essentially until June 22nd, when we, hooray, had permission to go back out and transact safely, of course, 6 feet apart and masked. So interestingly, that week of Q2 saw more contract activity than the whole, I think, 6 weeks of 2020, the beginning of 2020, which is really interesting. And I think that really speaks to a lot of the work that real estate agents across the city did in promoting properties virtually and having 3D Matterport tours and keeping properties alive for prospective buyers, so that when that day came, June 22nd, there was a record number of contracts signed in that week.
Wow. And so, okay, I understand year over year, like it's a hard comparison to make, but we're talking about contracts being up almost 60% from Q1 of this year to Q2. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I just call that pent-up demand, right? We saw in November of last year a great release. Once the election was over, buyers came back into the market pretty rapidly and scooped up some of the existing inventory. The start of the year was super strong. More and more inventory has started to come on, and spring is the high season of the market. So it doesn't surprise me that Q2 of this year was so strong. You have typical seasonality layered on top of that, a lot of pent-up demand.
I think you also had people getting vaccinated in the middle towards the end of Q1 as well. And a lot of people felt like, now I can go look at property. I'm fully vaccinated. Let's go out and let's get it. So I think that also helped.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they, people could move too, right? So that was part of the inventory release, as people who didn't feel like it was safe to pick up and move, who maybe had planned to a year or two before. I love to talk about the baby boomers, right? So the boomers who were planning to sell their homes and then were in lockdown and then were waiting to get vaccinated, suddenly we're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so tell us, how has buyer outlook changed over the last 16 months? Over to you, Aaron.
I mean, I have to echo, just what Molly said. I mean, it's interesting over that period of time to watch us go from, a raging buyer's market to a seller's market to a buyer's market to a seller's market. I always like to say, New York City and Brooklyn specifically is really hyper local. And it's really fluid. So there's always these overarching themes in the media that says it's this type of market. But the reality is that a lot of buyers, when you're on the ground with them, we're feeling things in real time that were really interesting. So if you flash back, like how Molly had said, just picking out a point in time, obviously we were shut down. So we know what that is. Pent up demand, people in November of 2020, I remember being in the streets with people dueling with highest and best. And really, there was this real small moment of time right after the elections happened. And then it got really quiet for a little bit. And then you had, because the elections weren't really resolved per se. And then feeling like if you got into 2021, right after I feel like it was around February 2021, that things started to really open up again. And people felt, to, Carson's point, vaccinations were more widespread. The social unrest that had dominated most of 2020 had kind of went more into the background. And again, the elections kind of feeling like, okay, this is officially where it is, whatever side you were on, it is what it is at this point. So then you see this mad rush, and that's what we felt over the last 4 months. It's just been insane. So from an outlook standpoint, buyers right now that I felt have been really fatigued. And they've been feeling really challenged because there's so many highest and best and losing out and just feeling so challenged. Obviously, 3 months before that, they felt really encouraged. There was really bright optimism and people are out and shaking and baking and making things happen. So I think overarching it's just really been kind of going in and out of different markets, if you will, and levels of enthusiasm and levels of fatigue.
And how has seller outlook changed over the last 16 months? Carson, over to you.
I think it's, news of higher prices. Data is more readily available to consumers than it has ever been. And that trend will always continue. But news of higher prices is drawing more sellers into the game. So inventory is popping up. And I think it's not popping up to concerning levels. I think we're just over the decade average for the second quarter in terms of inventory in Brooklyn, but Brooklyn has always had chronically low inventory. So I think this is a good market for sellers who price properly. This is not 2016 where you can just take the last sale and add 3% and not even do any homework and it still closes. So I think that they're wondering what's possible. I think that prudent sellers and prudent brokers are going to price it properly and they're going to get it sold with multiple offers.
Carson, I'm so glad you said that because I really want to shout it from the rooftops. It is not 2016 and 2017. I think at best we've come back to maybe end of 2018, beginning of 2019, which is great. Like that's a really great market, quick recovery. But for those who were looking to get out, to think that they're going to get 2016, 2017 pricing, like, no.
No, I think until you're seeing people waiving mortgage contingencies and waiving inspections in the boroughs, this market is not shocking to me. You know, and I think that the same is true. You know, I know attorneys who say, you know, in this country you can sue anybody for anything you want, but you can't always win. And the same is true of asking prices. You can list your property for whatever you want, but closing is a different story.
Right. Sellers can decide, you know, the range that they want to start the conversation. Buyers decide, you know, where the conversation ends. I think condition also plays a big part to that, Carson, because a lot of people, given COVID, the delays with DOB, we have some new development projects, Noel will tap in later, really delayed, and people are just fearful of even dealing with that. So I think if your place isn't turnkey and really that intersection of a great, you know, prime location, property size, priced right, and easy to go, like trying to ask for crazy numbers, not realistic either.
Well, that brings us over to you, Noel, as someone who specializes in new development. That has changed quite a bit in the last 16 months. What can you tell us about that?
For sure, it's changed dramatically. I mean, as Molly pointed out, we were closed. We weren't able to transact at all. So there are a lot of nervous developers, a lot of nervous investors. Everything had to be, I mean, you couldn't do in-person showings, so everything had to be through either floor plan purchasing, which is, it's a tough environment to do so. And then now, and also when we got out of that, it was a heavy concession environment. We were seeing sponsors pay a year of common charges and taxes, giving cash back at closing. And fast forward to now, a lot of sponsors are getting asking price. We just seen some deals where buyers and the sponsor are splitting the attorney fees and split the transfer taxes. I haven't seen that since 2017, 2018. That's a very rare thing. So it's picked up dramatically. The prices, it's project by project. As Aaron mentioned, usually some projects are still stale, but for the most part, it's picked up dramatically. It's night and day, basically, from last year.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, you know, big question on everybody's mind, is there a bubble in the New York City real estate market? Molly, what do you think?
No, there is no bubble.
Nope.
Oh my God, people love to talk about bubbles. I mean, it's just something that I read about every day. There is really nothing to suggest a bubble. This is nothing like 2008, 2009, right? Where that was really a financial crisis. That was a subprime mortgage crisis. That was people borrowing money who couldn't afford to pay the mortgage, right? Right now, we're seeing pretty tight lending restrictions. You know, I read a stat which was so interesting that in the first quarter of 2021, 75% of the loans written were written to people who had an average score of 780 or above credit score.
Wow.
That's huge. That's huge. These are people who have money, who can afford to pay the mortgage. I think we have an inventory problem nationwide. We have a building problem, a construction problem nationwide. There is a lot of demand, and I don't see any bubble bursting or prices significantly changing. Might they plateau? Yes. Certainly, and to Aaron's point, we have a lot of buyer fatigue right now, especially in really hot markets, and they're going to get burnt out. You know, nobody wants to go to an open house with 55 people. Nobody wants to be in a bidding war and pay, you know, 30% over the asking price. So buyers will retreat a little bit. It will normalize a little bit, and I think we'll see prices plateau, but it will still remain a healthy market.
Okay, that's promising. Anybody else think there might be a bubble or no?
Nope.
Nope.
And is the New York City real estate market slowing down at all?
I mean, it's summer, so yeah.
Right. It's definitely, seasonality and that buyer fatigue that we talked about. And there was this mad rush. Like, I don't know if I can recall, being in the business since 2008, so it's 13 years, how insane it's been for everyone, all of our colleagues across the industry over the last 4 or 5 months. So it almost feels welcomed. I talked to someone today and they're like, are you feeling like you just don't want to do what you're supposed to do right now and service client? I'm like, no, we're rocking, but I can appreciate you're just even beat up as well. But yeah, I've noticed that a bit because we just put in an offer on a place yesterday that got accepted that, I don't want to jinx anything, but normally that would have been something that would have just been really contentious and crazy. And we were able to kind of swoop in really quickly and establish. So I think there's something to be said for that, but is it done? Absolutely not. Things are still rocking. People are looking to buy for sure.
Okay.
Like low rates are going to keep people in the game for a long time.
Yeah,
and if you want to talk about, how is the local market doing? You got to look at the local economy, the local jobs, who like to Molly's point, the people that are getting mortgages in Q1, those people's jobs are virtual. Or at least hybrid, right? Most of them, they're keeping their jobs. So those types of buyers and those jobs are in good shape, and that's going to fuel a lot of the demand along with the rates.
And, there was a lot of talk about, New York City's dead. New York City's never coming back. I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but did any of you ever think New York City was dead?
No. If you lived here through 9/11 and being very respectful of that moment and seeing what happened just really literally months after that, it's hard to think that you could ever think that New York couldn't bounce back. But I think anyone would be lying to not think that we were up against the ropes pretty bad. Like, it really felt like a Muhammad Ali fight for sure. The rope-a-dope was happening, but dead, no.
Because we got hit so hard, right? For a long stretch there, we were nationally the epicenter of the COVID crisis. So, people love to talk about New York, whether it's doing well, whether it's not doing well. But I saw somebody post an awesome thing on Instagram, which was the question, nobody ever said Paris was dead, right? Which is such an interesting point, right? But I think it is, you're right, Aaron, because it looked bleak for a while there. It's for the city that never sleeps to be locked down for as long as we were. It was tough. Right.
I mean, even anecdotally, I can share, I had a client that had bought, a really, really expensive apartment, like really expensive, had all the plans, had furniture designed for this home, was coming, bought, closed, right in the middle of the pandemic, and ended up being, actually before the pandemic, obviously, pandemic hits, they're in New Zealand, they're safe. New York looks the scariest place in the world. And they're like, yeah, we want to put it on the market. We're not coming.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Kids were going to go to the school. My kids go to the whole thing. And we ended up selling it in the fall of 2020 and got it off in 30 days, fortunately. But that was crazy to have bought and 1 year later say, yeah, it just looks so bleak.
Right.
So it was real. It was palpable for sure. But dead, no. But we were definitely up against the ropes.
And that was such a beautiful home. I wonder if they would have felt differently had they ridden it out a bit, because tensions were very high in New York City. It was very scary.
For sure.
I remember being at the grocery store and someone would come too close to me and I was, get away from me. You know what I mean?
No, that's right.
So I think, but then when things started to open up and this energy just came back and it felt even more bright and wonderful, I had such a strong desire to be out and about and in the city. And I felt like everybody felt that at the same time because there was just a rush, an influx of people who had fled, stayed elsewhere during the pandemic, and who are back now. So happy to be back now. Obviously, carefully, we have to still be careful, but yeah, I can understand why they left when they left, and I also wonder if they,
right. But I remember being like, we ended up buying a house out east because it just felt like a pressure cooker. Participating in protests, rightfully being an expression, combined with a pandemic, combined with political energy.
Yes.
There was a lot of stuff going on at the same time. So all those layers really made it just it was tough. It was a tough time for sure.
But Aaron, did you ever doubt for a moment that the city would eventually come back?
No, absolutely not. You never bet against New York. I mean, this is New York is it, period.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's a time thing, and that's what I even told my clients, and they appreciate it. And then after the fact, he's like, wow, New York just seemed like it was the end of the world. And I'm like, can't blame you when you see people taking pictures in Times Square and there's not one car or one person there. Yeah, it feels a little apocalyptic, but no, it definitely had the faith, and grateful that all of us and our colleagues in our industry and many others, a lot of people left, but a lot of people did what I did. We added on, we didn't leave, but it felt like a lot of pressure. So it's like, all right, do the pressure release. It's okay, but don't jump ship. And most people didn't. And so that's a good thing. And that's clearly evident because, we're rocking right now.
There's a book called The History of the New York Row House from I think it's from the early 1800s until the 1900s. And in the beginning of the book, there's a quote. And the quote is from someone who says, I can hardly recognize the city. Anyone who hasn't been here in 10 years, would not recognize where they stand. And it was from the early 1800s. So this city constantly reinvents itself. Constantly, there is a inherent creation and destruction. Those two elements are coinciding with each other all the time. There's destruction and creativity. There's creativity and destruction.
Yeah.
And for better or for worse, and in many cases both, it will constantly reinvent itself and constantly churn. And this is just another example of it doing that same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. As a native
philosopher,
as a native New Yorker, I thought the sentiment that New York was dead was ridiculous. Had it changed? Absolutely. It was different. You're driving down, Borough or driving down Bedford and Williamsburg. It was a different look, but the energy was always there. The resilience was always there. It was just a different image for a bit, but New York is never dead. I just think it's insane to even think that.
Yeah, right. And well, I mean, obviously the pandemic has led to some changes. In what ways is New York City better now than it was pre-pandemic, if at all?
Outdoor dining.
Yes.
I love so many more blocks closed off. It's annoying when I'm driving, but when you're on foot, it's really amazing to have a bunch of streets closed off and people just milling about, and just, you feel that energy, and outdoor dining, I think, is definitely a come up for sure.
For sure. And to your point, Aaron, you guys bought a house out east. I know a bunch of people who just were so busy in their everyday lives in New York City that they weren't realizing how much of a need they had for some nature, for a little bit of a change. And I know several people who, got a second house in maybe whether it's the Hamptons or Florida or upstate New York, and have found more balance as a result. Because, you get caught up in work in New York City and you forget to really take a mental break.
Yeah, particularly if you have a family, right? Like, I'm a father of two, 13 and 11-year-old. And when I talk about the pressure cooker, to be fair, the motivation was really my kids, and my wife caught me off guard. We did an Airbnb out east for a little bit just to kind of get some breathing room. And we ended up loving it. Next thing I know, she's on Zillow looking at, places out east. I'm like, what's happening right now? So it was crazy. But that said, yeah, it did bring a lot of balance and more of an appreciation of Brooklyn, right? Because it's not something that I can do full time or that I even want to do full time. But to have them splash in the pool, run their feet in the grass, great. And then come back to Brooklyn, you appreciate the city and all the different characters, the energy, the vibe. It just actually made it more special.
Yes. I agree. And I bought a house in Florida during the pandemic, and so happy to be back in Brooklyn, but going back and forth, my dog loves the yard, and it's like, oh, I've been needing this. Well, what has surprised you all the most about New York City real estate in the last 16 months?
I'm surprised that people are buying outside of the city and waiving their home inspection to close the deal, and then they're surprised that there's something wrong with the house.
Yes. That is such a wave.
That's surprising to me. I would just assume I got to redo this system, that system, that system, and then if I don't, I'll be happily surprised. But that's a game that people, I think, started playing, and and the other, it's not to hog the mic, but the other thing that's surprising to me is how the media is such a fair weather friend to the real estate industry.
Yes.
And about these bogus headlines all the time about how like the world's coming to an end in terms of real estate and everyone's up a creek. And the story, as we know, is much more nuanced. And much more case by case than any of them would like to admit, but they got to sell those clicks,
Yeah, totally.
I'm with you, Carson. It's like the bane of my existence. I think what surprised me the most is how quickly the luxury markets come back. I say, I think at least once a day out loud, wow, people have so much money. Like, I mean, you look, I think we were breaking record after record, month over month in number of contracts signed in the luxury market until it just broke the 4th of July. Because guess what? All those people left town for a week. But I didn't expect that to come back as rapidly as it has. And it's pretty exciting and encouraging. And I would say the same thing about new development. To Noel's earlier anecdote, new development has come back so strong that there, very soon there will be no more concessions. The buyers will be paying all the closing costs and shooting themselves like shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's been a huge surprise to me.
Interesting.
That's really a point of saying, stop trying to time the market. Just get in. When it makes sense for you and your situation or your family, do it.
Yeah.
Period.
Well,
That's a new mantra right now is real estate is personal.
Mm.
It should not be a reflection or a decision that you make based on the macroeconomic housing. It's what do you need now and what can you afford?
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
And so to that point, what would you say to someone who's like, you know what, this market is insane. I'm going to wait until early next year before jumping in.
I think like Molly said, it's personal. I have clients that are actually doing that. And I have some that look at it. It's so funny. You always have kind of a couple camps. You have the people that they want to seize the moment and they like the certainty, even if it's quote unquote frothy, they know what's in front of them and they can wrap their heads around it. Then you have the other camp that's like, this is too frothy. It has to go lower than this. I'm going to wait it out because I just can't live with myself if I quote unquote overpaid. Yeah. So I think the advice is, if you're on the sales side, there's no time like the present. There are buyers out, and even if there's fewer buyers, they're very serious if they're out in summer. And if you're a buyer, if it makes sense, rates are low right now. We expect them to stay low. That may not be the case. You have a Delta variant out that may wreak havoc and you may get lucky and it drops, or it might not, right? So I think it's just really personal to assess what makes sense for you is what I would say for people.
Okay.
You gotta, no one buys or sells real estate casually. It's not like a fly by night decision. It's not something that anyone does off the cuff. So there has to be a net positive to your quality of life. And whether or not it's a good deal or what time of the cycle you're in when you do make that move should be so far down your list of considerations that it should almost not really be considered. As long as you're not overextended financially, and as long as you have a good reason to do what you're doing, do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Or don't.
Right.
Okay, well, this has been very interesting. I have one last question for you all, and that is, and I'd love to hear from each of you, although many of your answers may overlap. What advice do you have for current buyers and sellers in New York City?
I think some of the advices might be universal regardless of the market. So very basic, always use a transactional attorney, someone who only deals with contracts. You don't want your attorney, if you have a question, to find out they're at court. And some of my friends over at the big banks might not like this comment, but don't just focus the pre-approval from one of the big banks. Go out to a little bit of the smaller banks, maybe a community bank, to get a pre-approval. The big banks right now are just taking a little too long to get pre-approval, so just to get the process going. And then, of course, hire a Triplemint agent. Very basic, very simple.
That's right. We've got an incredible team right here on this market discussion who you can reach out to. That's good advice. I don't think people often think of going out to the smaller banks. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's definitely good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think for buyers, I think really start wide and then narrow to a laser. I think I'm working with a buyer now that on the face, it feels like they're all over the place, but I think it's been really helpful for them to get educated and appreciate value and what their money can buy them. And typically what happens with buyers, they think they want one thing and they end up in something totally different. So I would just give permission to buyers out there that it's okay. Start wide, but you do want to at some point narrow your search and focus like a laser because you don't want to miss out. So that way, the education is important so that you can recognize when it's in front of you that it's actually the place. But you do have to narrow at some point so that you can actually recognize it.
I think for sellers, you need to think of your list price as advertising and have nothing to do with market value. And as long as you think of your list price as your most powerful piece of advertising, you're in great shape. And you do the stuff that Aaron said, you do stuff that Noel said, you're way ahead of the game.
Okay.
No, that's powerful, Carson. Like we tell sellers all the time, this is not value. This is just where you want to start the conversation. So I love
the wrapping paper. Let's get someone to look present.
Right.
You know?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being on our market discussion today. I think it's been a fascinating market, a wild ride that I've been grateful to be a part of and to see. It's been a shocker in some ways to see how the market has shifted rapidly in, like Molly was saying, new development and rentals. It's been fascinating. And thank you all for being the incredible team that you are. For anyone who is tuning in and who wants any advice on buying, selling, or renting, please follow Aaron, Noel, Carson, and Molly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and if they have a YouTube page. I know that they would be happy to help you answer any questions you have and to help you get to the finish line, whatever your real estate goals are. And thank you again for tuning in. Make sure you join us next Wednesday at 11 for a New Jersey Q2 market update for Hudson County. And then the following week, we're going to be talking about New York City rentals, which is its own ball game. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thanks,
Thank you.